A vote is expected today by the House Judiciary on legislation that would provide a pathway to citizenship for more than 1 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. The proposal specifically would target DACA recipients as well as immigrants with temporary protected status, or TPS, as well as deferred enforced departure.
Meanwhile, an airport in Seattle, Washington is at risk of losing federal funding for failing to cooperate with ICE. The U.S. Department of Transportation has stepped in following reports that the King County executive began pressuring companies that fuel planes to stop servicing ICE flights at the King County Airport or lose their contracts. Joining us with her take on all of these things is House Judiciary member Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington State. She also serves on the Education and Labor and House Budget committees. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
It's great to be with you.
Take us through the contours of the immigration legislation you're dealing with today.
Well, today in Judiciary Committee, we will be taking up not only the DREAM Act, but also the Temporary Protected Status Bill. In total, would provide relief for about 2 million people, undocumented young people known as dreamers, also recipients of temporary protected status, which is when countries have, terrible things going on in those countries. The United States allows people to come to this country under something called temporary protected status. And so those two bills are going to go through Judiciary today. We have heard that the Republicans have 25 amendments. We could be here until the wee hours of the morning, but I don't know how anybody, Democrat or Republican, votes against a DREAM Act that provides relief for these young people who contribute so much to our economy, who are American citizens in all but paper, who were brought here often, didn't even know that they were undocumented, and have been living in the shadows until President Obama provided DACA relief, deferred action for childhood arrivals. That was the policy that Donald Trump overturned and said he wants a permanent congressional fix to that. He's for the dreamers, but he wants a fix. So here we are in Congress now, hopefully doing this by legislation. We hope to pass it out of Judiciary and take it to the floor within a couple weeks.
So, Congresswoman, explain what relief means. Is it a pathway to citizenship, or is it just restore the work permits under the DACA framework? Yeah. So it is a pathway to citizenship.
Well, it's much better than, yes, it's much better than DACA. It actually includes a pathway to citizenship. It is the most generous bill that we will have put on the floor because, as you know, public opinion has really changed over the years. Obviously, I've always been in favor of this as an immigrant rights activist before coming to Congress, but it's taken a while, and the Dreamers have really created that push and that movement because of their personal stories. You know, the economic contributions to each of the Republican districts is significant. If we were to allow these young people to be here, have a pathway to citizenship, become full U.S. citizens, and contribute to the economy as they want to do and are doing and have been doing.
So, Congresswoman, the King County Airport, as we referenced, has been used to deport by ICE 34,000 undocumented immigrants over the last decade there, and there's now a threat that they may lose federal funding because of some pushback on the idea of deporting immigrants through that airport and of fueling the ICE planes that are being used in those deportations. What can you tell us about that situation, and how do you think it's being handled?
I think it's being handled incredibly well by the King County Executive, Dow Constantine. You know, I worked with the King County Council years ago to really separate local law enforcement from federal ICE enforcement because ICE was really undermining the relationships that communities had with local law enforcement. So this is another version of that. I think he has done exactly the right thing. The Trump administration has tried before to punish Seattle for our don't ask immigration policies in the jails, not honoring ICE detainers, which are unlawful in many different ways. And the Department of Justice tried to say that they were going to stop grant funding at that time. That has not worked. You cannot penalize somebody for one thing in order to get them money for another thing. So I don't think this is going to work either. I'm proud of King County Executive and our county for really taking a strong stand. We have always been a place that welcomes immigrants and refugees. We are proud of that, and we will continue to be that.
But Congresswoman, withholding funds in order to incentivize another is a tried and true thing that's been used in federal legislation for a long time. I just don't understand. I mean, as a federal legislator, why are you siding with the local community, which is going against existing federal law? Why don't we just change the federal law? Why isn't that the priority instead of doing everything they can to undermine the Department of Justice?
Well, federal law does not allow for the kinds of actions that this department is taking. This department, this administration has been, as you know, vilifying, criminalizing immigrants and upping the enforcement. And we, of course, want to fix this at a federal level. That's what I've been working on for 15 years. I haven't given up yet. I still believe that comprehensive, humane immigration reform is in our pathway, in our future, and we're working towards that. But in the meantime, we have to hold a lawless administration accountable for some of the things that they are asking localities to do that undermine public safety. Jurisdictions also have responsibilities to their citizens, and these kinds of policies do not help local jurisdictions.
How is it lawless to want to deport criminals who were convicted in local courts? I mean, that's ultimately what it is, right? You don't really get deported from this country.
No, it isn't.
No,
it isn't.
In most, the ICE prioritization is of those who have committed crimes in local communities. Those are the people, and especially when detainers are involved.
Incorrect. I mean, one of the things that has happened is under Obama, we were able to get a policy in place called prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutorial discretion did what you said, which is it prioritized people with, criminal records who had caused harm to people and were a threat to public safety. That is no longer the case under this administration. Today in the United States, we detain 52,000 immigrants every day, and only 18% of them have even been convicted of any, even minor misdemeanor, and the majority of those misdemeanors are actually drug-related offenses, which are not, now we've legalized marijuana in Washington state. There are other issues there, but it's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of people that have been convicted of any crime. We have started to use detention as incarceration, but without the due process protections that people, at least some people, do have under our criminal justice system. This is a for-profit making venture, and so when you hear that people are, quote, criminals, you have to question that, push back on it, and recognize that the majority of people in ICE detention are not criminals. There is no prioritization under this administration, and we are spending enormous taxpayer dollars to vilify immigrants across the country.
Congresswoman, as you know, there's been a lot of growing momentum this week around the idea of opening an impeachment inquiry. Let's take a listen to a couple of your colleagues on that.
We need to use every tool at our disposal to make sure we can hold the administration accountable. If that leads us to looking into impeachment, we'll get there, but it's one step at a time.
And I was not in favor of some of the earlier efforts around impeachment. The president is creating the circumstances where we may have to consider it. I'm personally much more open to it now than I was even a few months ago.
And Congresswoman, I know you have said you are in support of opening an impeachment inquiry. Take us through what you would like to see happen and ultimately what the end game is. What's the goal, given that probably very unlikely that the Senate would convict?
Well, I think what we are facing right now is the equivalent of a constitutional crisis. We have an administration that refuses to acknowledge the authority, co-equal branch authority of Congress. And there are a couple of different ways to address that, and I think Democrats are united on two things. One, we are delivering on our agenda for the people, and two, we refuse to allow anyone to be above the law, including the President of the United States, and we're going to demand accountability. The question is how. So we have a number of avenues to pursue. One is the courts, and Judge Mehta, as you know, and we were talking about good South Asians everywhere, but we have Judge Mehta in the courts who gave a great decision the other day on Trump's tax returns, on the Mazars case, and we have another, a whole set of subpoenas that the Judiciary Committee has authorized that will probably go to the floor as a package very shortly, because the Trump administration has said we're not going to honor any legally authorized subpoenas. We're not going to allow witnesses to testify. You know, Don McGahn was ready to come and testify before us, but the Trump administration said he couldn't, using a really ridiculous OLC opinion, which essentially made the same argument that George W. Bush made in 2007 with Harriet Miers, was overturned in the courts, and people said you cannot claim this total immunity for senior presidential advisors. So block is all we get from the Trump administration. I would say there's ongoing obstruction of justice, and so many of us on the Judiciary Committee feel that it is now time to open a formal impeachment inquiry, which is not an impeachment vote, but an inquiry, so that we can have as much leverage as possible to get the witnesses and the documents that we need to get in the committee, so that we can really evaluate everything in front of us and then figure out where to go from there.
If they're
obviously
just
people are in some different places.
I mean, obviously, look, you're already issuing subpoenas that they're just saying, we don't care, we're not doing it anyway. I mean, doesn't opening an impeachment inquiry really change the dynamic?
It does. It gives us a little bit more formal authority to be able to get the information that we want out to the American people. And, you know, I just look back at the Watergate hearings. I mean, when the Watergate hearings were started, only 19% of the public thought that they were important, thought that Nixon should be impeached. But part of our job is to make sure we get the information, that we question the witnesses within the Mueller report, but also beyond that, for violations of the Emoluments Clause and other constitutional violations that this administration is engaged with. And once we are able to evaluate that and also get it out to the American people, I really believe that people will see that this president and this administration has committed severe crimes in office, obstruction of justice, and we will see where the evidence leads us. But I think that is very important for the American people to understand exactly what's going on, and for us to understand exactly what's going on and get the information that Congress is entitled to. The only difference between a dictatorship and a democracy is we have checks and balances. And when one branch says we're not going to, honor the authority of another branch, we're in deep trouble.
Final question for you, Congresswoman. Are you frustrated with Speaker Pelosi's efforts to try and quash the impeachment inquiry? Has she satisfied you and other members who are looking to open an impeachment inquiry?
I'm not frustrated at all. I think that Speaker Pelosi is a really smart, strategic leader of our caucus, and she has a very different role. She has to think about the entire caucus. I think her, as I said earlier, we're united around delivering on our agenda for the people, and we're united in holding the president and this administration accountable. And I think she also believes both of those things. The question is just, how do we get there? When do we get there? What tactics do we use to ensure that Congress still maintains its oversight and authority over, in relation to the other branches? Obviously, the courts is one branch, but our own inherent authority for Congress in Article 1 is also extremely important. So I'm not frustrated. I feel like this is all part of the process, and I respect her role and where she is, because she's reflecting that not everybody in the caucus is in the same place in terms of what the best strategy is. We're in the same place in terms of the goal, but we're still working out exactly what the best strategy is in the face of, again, what I would say is a lawless administration.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Great to have you this morning.
Next on Rising, the executive versus the legislative branch subpoena fight continues, for which Fox News host advocated for pardoning alleged war criminals. And
the latest champion of impeachment, Justin Amash, could change his party affiliation. Maybe. We're going to tackle all of that with Team Rising next.